Sojourner Truth is best known to history for her "Ain't I a Woman" speech she gave at a women's rights meeting/debate in Ohio in 1851. Because she was born and raised in slavery, Sojourner Truth never had an opportunity to learn how to read or write, so she didn't write her speeches in advance. This is an extemporaneous speech she's giving off the top of her head. It was written down after the fact by one of the people who was listening there. The person who wrote down the speech tried to capture her accent, so apologies in advance for the unusual spelling and pronunciation. Here goes. "Well, children, where there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. Dat man over dar say that women needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen 'em most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman?" Now, that's a good speech, and that is similar to some things that Truth said in that speech, but there are some issues with this version. Now, this version was the standard version. This is the one that I learned in school, and we thought this was actually what Sojourner Truth said until the late 90s, when a really good historian working on a biography of Sojourner Truth figured out that this version of the speech is in fact bogus. It's a forgery. The guy who wrote it down many years after the fact might have seen the original speech, but he ended up throwing in a bunch of stuff that wasn't there. And there's a bunch of good reasons we know that this version is bogus. Let's start with the fact that that is not the accent that Sojourner Truth spoke in. That is, the guy is rewriting. He's remembering her speech as if she spoke like a Southern black person in the U.S. at the time. She didn't speak like a Southern black person because she wasn't from the South. Sojourner Truth was born in New York. New York was one of the last northern states to give up slavery. The way New York got rid of slavery was a gradual emancipation law, where people born into slavery gained their freedom. I think women became free at 21 and men became free at age 28. And so that law that they passed in the late 1700s made it so eventually slavery by the early 1800s was gone in New York. But that didn't help her. Sojourner Truth was born in slavery and had her first few kids in slavery. Now, we know that, well, first of all, we know that Northern blacks had different accents than Southern blacks back then. She had a particularly unusual accent because her owners were New York Dutch. So her first language wasn't English. Her first language was the dialect of Dutch that was being spoken in that community in New York. She learned English starting at age 9. She only had 5 kids. She never had 13 children. And she didn't have most of her children sold away from her. Like, most of her kids were born into slavery with her. When she walked away from slavery with her baby daughter, she had one son left behind, and his owner, before his son got old enough to be free, sold him into slavery in Alabama. Now, that was illegal under New York law. Sojourner Truth knew it, so she sued and forced her former owner to buy back her son out of slavery in Alabama and hand him over to freedom. Now, this is a famous speech. It's just this was the wrong version of it. The same historian who found the who proved that this was the fake version also found a truthful version of the speech that was printed just a few days after she gave the original, that is the accurate version of her speech. Here's what she said. I have heard much about the sexes being equal. I have as much muscle and can do as much work as any man. I have plowed and reaped and husked and chopped and mowed, and can any man do more than that? I can carry as much as any man, and can eat as much too, if I can get it. Now, next in her speech, she's responding to something that a guy was saying earlier. There was a debate going on, and earlier a man in this debate had said, women don't need full equality because women aren't as smart as men. And so Truth is here responding to that argument. She said, as for intellect, all I can say is if women have a pint and man a quart, why can't she have her little pint full? You need not be afraid to give us our rights, for fear we will take too much. For we can't take more than our pint will hold. This is a very clever argument. She's not going to argue with the guy. She's not going to try to convince that guy that women are as smart as men are. In fact, she's going to use his belief that men are smarter than women to say, hey, giving women equal rights is no threat, right? Because if we're naturally inferior and you give us equal rights, men are still going to be in charge. It's a very clever argument. The poor men seem to be all in confusion and don't know what to do. Why, children, if you have women's rights, give it to her, and you will feel better. You will have your own rights, and they won't be so much trouble. Right? She's pointing out that people who have rights don't lose them when new people get rights. I can't read, but I can hear. I have heard the Bible and have learned that Eve caused man to sin. Well, if woman upset the world, do give her a chance to set it right side up again. Here talking about the story of the Garden of Eden, where Eve influences Adam to eat the forbidden fruit, and she's saying, give women a chance to make it right. The lady has spoken about Jesus, how he never spurned woman from him, and she was right. When Lazarus died, Mary and Martha came to him with faith and love, and besought him to raise their brother, and Jesus wept, and Lazarus came forth. Right, so here Jesus is performing a miracle at the urging of women, and indeed the Bible recounts that Jesus spent considerable time with women. And how came Jesus into the world? Through God who created him, and woman who bore him. Man, where is your part? Right, so Jesus came from God and a woman, right? Mary gave birth to God, or Jesus in the Bible story. So she's pointing out that mortal men had nothing to do with Jesus being in the world. But the women are coming up, blessed be God, and a few of the men are coming up with them. Man is in a tight place. The poor slave is on him, woman is coming on him, and he is surely between a hawk and a buzzard. So that's most of the actual speech Sojourner Truth gave. Ironically, people still call it the ain't I a woman speech, even though the words ain't I a woman are not in the speech, right? That was some creative writing by the well-meaning but misguided guy who printed the bogus version many years later in the newspaper. So there's Sojourner Truth.